Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Music Masterclass. Today is Thursday, November 19th. My name is Marc Sabatella with the Mastering MuseScore School. And yes, this is my weekly Music Masterclass, kind of a new thing that I've been doing. And I'm happy to see people here. I'm
Hello, everyone.
Yes, I am making sound. All right, beautiful. Okay, so a couple things before I get started. Every once in a while, I've had these like technical glitches where the screen goes blank and or my audio cuts out. And I still don't know exactly what's going on, but I'm wondering something. Maybe people who have experienced these with me, I think it's happened like maybe 4 times this year. And I think it's only been in my music master class, not in my MuseScore Cafe. And if so, it could indicate some difference in my settings. And so I'm kind of a little curious if anyone else has any insight into that, if because I don't remember the times when it's happened specifically. Um, in any case, I just thought I would put that out there. And I'm happy to see people here, and I've got a bunch of music kind of queued up to be looking at. And as always, I want to make sure that we understand kind of what's happening here as far as like maybe ground rules. So I pinned to the top of the chat the link to where the actual course is on my site that you can enroll in. And you can be watching this video without being enrolled. Obviously, it's on YouTube. But the point of enrolling is then I have a way where I can send messages to everyone who's in the class, and you have a place where you can post your uh, your compositions, and we can have discussions in there. And then also, and so that's what's pinned. And then I also want to just post the link to the Music Masterclass group. Oh, and I need to get my chat window back here. Chat. Let's pop that sucker out. Music Masterclass on MuseScore.com. So I just want to make sure that we always have these links available. This is the best place to post your music in order to get comments on it, like comments from other people in addition to me. And I want to encourage that as much as possible. I want to encourage you all to be commenting on each other's music. Um, so I will be looking at some of the music that was posted there. I'll be looking at a couple pieces where people just posted in comments within the masterclass, and that is fine. Also, there's places, the comments within the course. You can post a link to it if you don't put it in the group on musescore.com. But the group is really a good place for things. Um, so I want to do that, and I also want to make sure I mention the harmony and chord progressions. I have a course also for that. That there's a lot of exercises in that course, and I'm going to be using some of the music that people have posted. Like Rod, I see you're awake, so I'm going to go ahead and look at one of yours here. I'll probably start with the Twinkle Twinkle Little Star one, unless you'd rather me look at the other one. And Heis, I'll look at one of your more recent submissions here also. Um, so those are some of the things that I want to look at. And I want to look at a piece that was submitted that I talked about very, very briefly last week, but I wanted to get some more information from the composer, Kika. And I now understand a little more about what's going on with it, and it's going to be really interesting to talk about. Before I do that, though, I want to I want to mention that. So in the United States here, next week is Thanksgiving. So that is a holiday, and I will not be doing the class live. I will be still commenting on stuff that people post periodically. Um, I want to put out a little mini challenge to people. And this is, holidays are coming up. So Thanksgiving is a holiday in the United States. For people that don't know, it just commemorates when the first settlers came, or some of the first settlers anyhow, came to the United States from Europe. The natives kind of greeted them and helped them make it through the winter. And this was like thanks for us being alive. Basically, we made it. We're surviving. They had a feast to celebrate that they made it through. That they had a harvest, and So it's a opportunity to give thanks for things, and I'm very thankful for all of you who follow me here and help make this musical community what it is. So there's not a lot of music though that goes with Thanksgiving. Christmas obviously is coming up, and there's a ton of Christmas music. There's not a ton of Thanksgiving music. There are, however, a few hymns that sort of have some theme of people gathering together for a feast and giving thanks. And so there's a number of hymns that are often used. And I want to play you uh, an arrangement that I've just more or less completed. I'm still tweaking. I got to add the lyrics of a hymn called "We Gather Together." It's a well-known hymn, I guess. It's been around for centuries, but it's especially well-known in the United States because it is used often to commemorate Thanksgiving. And so this version, this arrangement that I've created here, uses a lot of the harmonic techniques that I talk about all the time, but I'm trying to be a little more do so in moderation. So it's let me post the link before I forget. I'm using the harmonic techniques that I talk about in moderation to try to make it a little more singable. If you do everything that I do in some of my harmonizations that I talk about in that harmony and chord progressions course, you can end up with something that's really hard to sing. Even if you try to follow good voice leading principles, you just end up with really awkward interval, weird chromaticism things. So I wanted to make this interesting and yet make it singable. And so I'm actually my model for this was thinking about um, like every once in a while after the news comes on the TV show The Voice, and I'll hear a little bit of that. It's not something I normally pay attention to that much, but every once in a while something comes on, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And when there's like a vocal group, I realize there's this whole style of vocal harmony that pop singers and folk groups and country groups that have harmonization happening that they do. And I'm sort of starting with that as my jumping off point. And then I try to take it a little more in my own personal language. So I'm not going to claim this is going to be easy for people to sing, but I do think it would be singable. And, had I finished it in enough time, I would have tried to get some people together to sing it. But, maybe next Thanksgiving. So I'm just going to take a listen here. Yes, it is a Dutch hymn. It is absolutely a Dutch hymn. So yeah, here we go. Before I go any further, make sure the sound's working. Well, I'll just start it over again. If the sound's not working, let me know. So there you go. Happy Thanksgiving next week, everyone. So I've mentioned a challenge to you. I wrote this to be, sort of be in this sort of a little more of a pop genre than I typically write in. Um, And I did that just, I don't know, on a whim. But we've got all this holiday music coming up, and I would love to see some people create some arrangements of holiday music, whether it's a vocal group, whether it's meant to be in a pop style like this, or more in a classical style, or a jazz style, or a solo piano piece. I really don't care what you do, but let's take a look at some holiday music to keep ourselves in the spirit over the next month or so. Um, so yeah, thanks for the comments, and yeah, I just wanted to put that out there to maybe as some form of inspiration for things. I will tell you that uh, most of the harmonizations, you can see it's all pretty diatonic, so I'm trying to keep it interesting and yet mostly diatonic, and I kind of used chromaticism fairly judiciously. A little passing diminished chord here. And I get a little denser with it in this one kind of breakdown section where the guitar drops out and the drum gets simpler here. Just in that section, I actually use almost everything that I ever talk about in my harmony course. I think, yeah, there's like borrowed chords, there's secondary dominants, but there's also an augmented sixth chord in here, and so it's definitely actually, the augmented sixth chord, now that I think about it, the actual augmented sixth is missing from it. So I guess that's sort of a little bit of a lie. I might have to adjust my harmonization to get the actual the important note into that chord. But in any case, I tried to keep one section where I put all of the really intense harmonies, like the places where there's like really perhaps slightly difficult to sing intervals and things. Even then I tried to keep it singable, but the rest of it is much, much, much simpler. So this idea that if you want to put something that's really harmonically interesting in a piece for singing, to be judicious about how you do it. Maybe make there be the one really hard section that they're going to have to work on really hard, and then give them easier pieces, easier sections later. That's something maybe to keep in mind. It says not available to public. Do I have it private? Oh, I have to make it unlisted. You're right. Okay. I thought it was unlisted. If it's unlisted, it should be available. Um, well, um, yeah, I want to add the lyrics and then I will make it public later. I'm surprised though. I thought unlisted scores. I'll tell you what, I can add it to the group, and I think that allows it to work. I think once I've added it to a group, members of the group can get to it. So I will do that. I will say, but I still want to add the lyrics and maybe make a couple other little tweaks. So I'm going to add it to the Music Masterclass group. There we go. So now you should be able to access it. Did I actually get it added? Looks like it didn't add. I must have clicked the wrong thing. I clicked the name of the group rather before I clicked the add button. So let me try that again. Add to group. Music Masterclass. Add. There we go. Okay, so now it should be added to the group. If you're a member of the group, you can get to it. If not, add yourself. Okay, so I want to now jump to some music here. And so this is Kika's, well, we heard music, but now I want to hear some of your music. So Kika, this is a piece that is loosely, I think, is a fair assessment, based on a Sonny Rollins, who's a jazz saxophonist, a piece of his called Blue 7. And it's going to start off with this dialogue between, and this is an updated version of it that I haven't seen yet, but at this point it is bass clarinet and electric bass. And it's a very free-form duet here. And the way Kika described it, and okay, so I'm gonna have to be like I don't know if Kika is a male or female name, so I don't know to be saying he or she. So I apologize for that. So feel free to clarify that for me. But There's a freeform dialogue here, and it could just as well have been improvised. And apparently, that was the original intent to say, "Oh, improvise this thing." But in order to be able to hear something when developing the piece and have something as a starting place, the composer chose to write out some notes, and now those notes are kind of there. And this is actually pretty common in my world also. I might intend something to be improvised, but I'll write something out as kind of a placeholder for it. And then at that point, I then sort of become attached to that version of things. And then if people don't want to actually improvise, that's fine. So, thank you very much for clarifying that. For some reason, that was my guess. Okay, so let's listen to this piece. It's a few minutes long, and then I'm going to come back and talk about a few sections of it. Yeah. So I really enjoy this piece, and yeah, it's really interesting to me. Just that we're going to have just this wide variety of stuff to talk about in here because everyone's coming from such different places. And so we've gone from a Renaissance piece, kind of a Renaissance themed piece, anyhow, that we started with a couple weeks, my pop song that I just sort of posted based on a hymn, and then this, which has an entirely different uh, an entirely different character. So I want to talk about the things that I can talk about, and talk about the things that I can't talk about. Talk about what kinds of things I can and are harder to talk about. So the whole dialogue that happens here. So if Kika mentioned that it's meant to be sort of improvised, one of the things that we can see is it really is kind of a dialogue in that, for the most part, it's one instrument at a time, right? It's just these two instruments. Actually, let me get it in, open up in MuseScore so I have a little more control over the formatting. Sorry about that. Let me get to the place where I have that. There we go. Okay, so I say I have more control over it, but in order to have control, I need to turn off the pan. All right, here we're gonna go. If I can turn it back on now. So it's mostly one note at a time with little overlaps, and that is really nice. That is a good way. If you think about how conversation often happens, it does have that overlap. One person will start coming in before the other person finished, and then either because they're anxious to answer the thing, or the first person maybe add something after whatever their natural stopping point was. If you want to mimic conversation, one of the things you might want to do, that's one of the things you can control, is how much of that overlap you have. And one of the things you could do, if you wanted, is thin out the texture at the beginning. In other words, have more space between the phrases, less overlap at the beginning, and then work into more overlap. Now, this, I won't say mimics how actual conversation happens necessarily, but as a musical device, as a musical translation of a conversation, it works pretty well to keep the themes a little more separate and then allow them to overlap more as you go along. And this, as a frame of reference for you, Kika, since you obviously have a background in listening to jazz, one of my very favorite examples of this sort of thing, you might be familiar with as well, since bass, clarinet, and bass is the thing, is Charles Mingus's "What Love." Are you familiar with that one, Kika? What Love? What Love is based on the chord progression to the song "What Is This Thing Called Love," and it is really quite literally a conversation between bass and bass clarinet. That's just and Eric Dolphy playing bass clarinet. So I sort of have to imagine, Kika, you probably have that as a frame of reference. But I got to play a little bit of this because it is so fun. I'm sure we're going to have to hear an ad first, and I apologize for that.
Thank you again.
Oh, no, good.
For not applauding. You dig it? Now,
Here we go.
We'll go on with What Love. 1, 2.
Oh, it starts off with notes. I got to jump to where the dialogue is. Here we go. Here's the dialogue. So it's kind of a monologue here of just the bass. Yeah. Maybe let's jump a little further ahead because I forget when the bass clarinet comes in. And they're doing definitely some overlap. And they already have their monologues. I skipped past some of that. Yeah. And it's great because Mingus on bass. This part here is like literally trying to sound like speech. I mean, that just sounds so much like an actual discussion. It's like an argument they're having about Eric Dolphy leaving the band. So anyhow, it's as a point of reference for imitating a conversation between two instruments, the different textures that they get happen, the different pacings of how the overlaps happen, of how fast the notes happen. This is all kind of stuff you can play with when you're not playing with harmonic material. In other words, we're not trying to worry about the intervals between the notes and whether there's a consonance or a dissonance between them, right? That is not here. That, talking about they are, you have them doing the exact same rhythm, which is great. You can do that composing. It's not likely to happen improvising, right? So it's kind of nice to have little composed sections where things will come together. One of the nice things about improvisation is that things will happen that are often better than you could ever planned. There's a certain way that tension and release happens naturally in improvisation, even free improvisation, in which you can never totally reproduce with composition, and yet there's things that composition can do that improvisation can't, and so it's really nice to be able to use those things together. Anyhow, so that whole introductory conversation is interesting in itself. To write with no bars, here is how you can do it. I just make this really easy. I'm going to select the first measure of that passage. Actually, let me go back to page view because we're going to want to do it like a little chunk at a time. Say I want to make these 4 measures all get joined together. I'm going to select them and go to Tools, Measure, Join Selected Measures. Bam. Now it's one long measure, right? And then you just do the same for each of these systems. Now, what you'd want to do is, and I've actually defined a shortcut for it. It doesn't come predefined with this shortcut, but I do it often enough that I made Control-Alt-J be join, and it joins them together into one long measure. You might want to be in the habit of putting explicit page breaks there also, just to make sure that is where the page breaks, that it doesn't decide to stick another beat in, it doesn't decide to stick the next measure into it. And so, you might want to decide for yourself what you want to combine, but that's what you do. Select little sections and then join them together. So that now has that going on. So that's how you could do that. And since it is meant to be not metrical and all, then that's fine. On the other hand, when you have those passages you wanted to align, if you really do intend people to play it as written, there were those places like that one spot that I can't find now because I don't have the obvious frame of reference for it anymore. But it was a place where the 2 instruments had exactly the same rhythm, and now I've lost it. That's a different one, but it's the same idea. It's a little harder to figure out if the rhythms line up when you don't have measures to kind of organize it. So if you're trying to get people to align rhythmically, bar lines do help, even if they're meaningless. They just provide a frame of reference. All right, so now this is where the composition portion begins here. Right here, it's no longer improvised. And so when you're writing for an ensemble that is not, so you're writing a piece that is inspired in some way by jazz, and in Blue 7, in fact, I should play a little bit of Blue 7 so they can hear that as well. Blue 7, Sonny Rollins. It's a blues, And I'm guessing that some of your melodies are extracted from his improvised solos. No, I don't want to take a survey right now. Jump a little ahead. Jump a little further ahead. This is the melody. At this point, he's more into his improvised solo now. So that is the first point I actually heard like a clear statement of the harmony. Oh, it went to a 4-chord there, if you're paying attention. It is loosely a blues, but it's a very loose interpretation of blues. And so a lot of those lines end up sounding very atonal. And so even though divorced from the original context, it's a little hard for me to tell. I'm guessing that some of the melodic fragments that we're hearing in the piece, once like over here, I'm guessing that some passages like that were actually transcribed from a little chunk of Sonny Rollins' solo. I don't know if that's literally the case or not, but okay, if it was unconscious. Good to know. Because it's reminiscent. Some of those lines felt like some of Sonny Rollins' lines. So what I was starting to say, though, is when we're divorcing a piece that has a jazz influence from a jazz band, it means we don't have bass, had that walking bass that was really insistent, right? Boom, 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 right? The walking bass and the drum. So we don't have that to be our rhythm section. So when you're trying to do something that's trying to have a sense of a pulse in an ensemble like this, where you don't have bass and drums, some of the techniques that you used here, I think, are really effective, like this ostinato figure that happens in the piano. Right? Those sort of ostinato figures, and here you have an actual piano doing it, so it's a rhythm section instrument. If you were trying to do this in say, an orchestra, that's a typical string figure. And strings are great for ostinatos, not because they sound particularly great doing it, but because they don't have to breathe. Or more particularly, you can keep playing even while you're breathing. And that's a really useful thing. So being able to have an ostinato figure that's just in the strings, if you wanted to have this performed in an ensemble without a pianist. And so that's the next question. I think originally you might have mentioned a concert band for this. And there is like a concert band type of instrumentation here a little bit, in that we have mostly winds. But the presence of the violin and the cello and the piano is like not your average concert band. So I don't know if this is an ensemble that you actually, there is an ensemble that you know of or play in that uses this instrumentation that you're writing for. And if so, great. If not, great too. But I would encourage people to think about writing for ensembles that maybe exist, so that someone might actually perform the thing. Because it's an incredible rush, an incredible high to hear your music performed by actual musicians. And so, if there's any number of schools that have concert bands, and you write something that's playable, if the difficulty level isn't too much, you can often get a local high school or something to play the music if it fits their instrumentation. I will say that the tolerance of your typical high school band for atonal music like this is not very high, and so you'd have to find one that's open-minded enough to want to tackle something like this. Okay, it existed, so great. So if you know that band is open to this kind of music, so much the better. So the use of that ostinato figure is really nice, and then I like the fact that it's not actually throughout the piece. In other words, at some point we lose the ostinato, and the ostinato changes, right? It's the rhythm stays here, but it's complemented by other instruments now also, and it changes harmony. And I put harmony in my air quotes here because there really isn't a harmony in the sense of chords, but we can check out the change that happens here. And now it's like, oh, it changed. It's like it changed key there. Even though we're not talking about a chord progression, we can still talk about the feel change that happens from a change of the harmonic context. So by changing what that cluster is, how it's voiced, the fact that because the top cluster is really the same, G and G flat, but the bottom note went from a D flat to a D sharp now, and so now it's got a different feel. It's like it raised key a little bit. So that kind of is a good element to be able to play with, and then have places where we totally go out of the ostinato. Now, this ostinato figure is different, right? It's not bump, 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 bump. It's reminiscent of it, but it's different. So that's another nice use of this device of keeping this continuity. It feels related to what was there before, but it's a little bit different. It's now eighth, eighth, quarter, eighth, eighth, quarter. You have it written as eighth, 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 rest, but basically the difference between a staccato quarter note and an eighth note is close enough to non-existent that I could have called this a quarter note with a staccato dot, and it would have sounded the same. Well, yeah, it sounds roughly the same either way. So it changes around there, and then it again, as we get further into the piece, we finally lose the ostinato entirely. And now it's the ostinato that's happening down here in the winds that kind of takes over. That ba-da-da-da-da has been going kind of throughout the piece, on and off, right? So we've got little bits of that little figure happening, but now it becomes kind of a central organizing principle, because at this point now the piano is not happening, and now we get this consistently. So that becomes a thing, and then finally we set up this change, like, oh, now there's no ostinato at all happening. Right, this is now the place where it sort of opens up a little bit more, and we don't have the repeating rhythm happen at all. And so now here is the one place where I'm a little confused about what's going on, but I will say you have this written with a 6/8 time signature, but none of the rhythms, or very few of the rhythms, feel like 6/8 to me. 6/8 would typically be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or more to the point, 1 and a 2 and a 1 and a 2 and a. In other words, we expect 6/8 to be grouped in that way, 2 sets of 3/8 notes. And here this is really 3/4, right? We have quarter, 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 and then we have 2/8 notes, and then we have 4/16 notes, quarter. Everything about the rhythms here is really more 3/4. Now, if there was a certain sense of a pulse that was working against, if elsewhere there was a stronger sense of that dotted quarter pulse, because 6/8, that should be our pulse, is dotted quarter. If there was a dotted quarter pulse, in other instruments, and this was like a polyrhythm on top of that, then I'd say go for it. But as it is, I think calling this 6/8 is maybe missing the point a little bit. And I think if I just change that to 3/4, it won't do anything other than rebeam things in a clearer way. And notice what a difference that made. Here, it looks like 8th, 8th, 16th, 16th, and then 16/16 quarter note, and someone might try to phrase it that way, and nothing about that feels very natural because that's not really what it sounds like. On the other hand, when I write it as 3/4, bum 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 ba da 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 dum, dun 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 da 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 dum, now it feels much more like what it sounds like. And to me, there wasn't a strong enough. I mean, if you really, really, really meant there to be an accent on this D here, because that's the note that is defining big beat 2 in 6/8, I would say you would have needed to have supported it with something else to really indicate that no, that really is the big beat. But to me, this makes more sense in 3/4. Ding, 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 ding. So it makes much more sense to me if I think it in 3/4 than when I was trying to think it in 6/8, because the rhythms themselves didn't lend themselves to that. Even just things like this, 1 and 2, right? That makes a lot of sense. Where 1 and then 2, 1 and I guess would be syncopated in 6/8, but nothing about it felt as syncopated, especially given that there is then a quarter note here and another quarter note there. So I mention this in as much detail as I am because even when it goes back to 4/4, I feel like something happens at some point where the beat feels like it is turned around for me. And I'm not sure how to describe this. By the way, just notationally, instead of using a dotted quarter rest, using a quarter rest and an eighth note is better. Dotted quarter rests are best left to 6/8, where the dotted quarter is the beat. And then this B flat kind of straddles the bar line, straddles the middle of the measure. And so it's better written as a B flat tied to another B flat like that. I would say that's a little less true in music where we're not really having a strong sense of a traditional pulse, but even so, from a readability perspective, this is going to be easier to keep people in sync if you honor that, showing beat 3. So the place towards the end where the trumpet, I feel like the trumpet melody, all right, so here is where I say it feels like the beat has turned around. I'm hearing these notes here. Boom, ding, ding. I don't hear that as 1, 2, 3. And I'm wondering if that's just my ears playing tricks on me, or if actually something has transpired such that you would have been better off notating a measure that's like a 7/8 measure in here and then offsetting things. And so I want to hear that section one more time. All right, if I count along with it and clap, I can hear it, but my ear originally heard those as offbeats. 1, 1. And I think the reason I got fooled is because of all these offbeats, right? The offbeats that are in this part started to establish themselves in my mind as if that was the beat, and that's okay. That is fine. I'm used to hearing that type of figure with something still happening to establish the beat, and I guess the piano ostinato is doing that. But if you had one instrument, just one instrument that was in the bass range, like I'm going to put something in the cello. I'm just going to give it some low C quarter notes to establish the pulse a little more strongly here. Yeah, I don't know that really helped. It's a little too mushy sounding. I would have wanted something more kind of percussive to feel like that. Anyhow, I think that was really just my ears playing tricks on me, and I'm not worried about it at all. So in any case, those are just some of the things that I hear about this, and I really really like the piece, and I like all the things that's constructed about it. My last comment about it will be the ending. To me, feels a little abrupt, and it's hard to figure out how to end a piece when you don't have things like 2-5-1 cadences to finish things. It feels like it kind of ran out of notes more than like it built to some sort of climax. Not that a piece has to build to a climax, but there's basically two ways you would typically end a piece, either by building to a climax or fading out. That's one of the two things you do. You either build into the ending or you fade into the ending. And I don't mean literally fade out like the guy moving the mixer slider down and the fade out repeating thing. I don't mean literally that, but I mean decrescendo to a quiet point. But also, usually the harmonic rhythm or the rhythm of the piece will either accelerate into a and have a climax there, or bum 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 and have a retard into the ending. These are sort of the cliche things that you do. You build to a climax, you come down to an anticlimax. Anticlimax is a bad choice of word there, but I don't have a better one. And this doesn't do either of those things, which is what it makes me feel like it just sort of ran out of notes. And I'd be more okay with that if I heard harmonically a 2-5-1 chord progression, because then that in itself provides that sense of finality. But I'm not saying you should introduce one to an otherwise atonal piece. But I am saying that you could maybe figure out some way of ending it more convincingly, unless you'd want it to feel like Charles Ives' The Unanswered Question, and feel like, well, that comes down to an anticlimax. At that time, the word anticlimax is actually kind of appropriate, but it was a very conscious choice there. So if it's meant to feel like, oh, it just was left hanging, then I would say go ahead and leave it that way. There you go. Oh, there was a drummer. Okay, so yeah, so if there's a drummer, that's definitely going to change my sense of things on how that goes. So yeah, and it's really interesting. Yeah, it is very deep to talk about some of the things that I'm talking about. But what's really interesting is when we deal with music with a traditional harmonic framework, it's so easy to get wrapped up in looking at that harmonic framework, looking at the 2 chord and the 5 chord and the 1 chord and the secondary dominants and blah, 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 and looking at the voice leading. We don't look at some of these other issues. When you strip away the harmony, now these other issues of form and rhythm and texture become that much more important. Texturally, I said I was the last comment, but another comment is texturally. Just when I zoom way out like this, you can see some nice things going on where there's really dense passages where all the instruments are playing at once, and then thinner passages where some instruments rest. And by gosh, the wind instruments, you better give them a bunch of these, because they need to. It's not enough just to sneak breaths in. You can't go a 4-minute piece with nothing but sneaking breaths in. You need to give them a chance to take some deep breaths by giving wind players longer rest periods. So yeah, using different textures, and then using maybe different sections, like, use just the brass together, just the winds together, or just this little heterogeneous section where it's a 1 violin, 1 trumpet, and 1 clarinet together as a section, getting these different textures. These are all things you can do and are to some extent happening here. My guess is you could probably get a little more textural variety than you have. But in any case, those are also things that apply to tonal music. So I've spent a lot of time talking on this because I really wanted to. It's a really wonderful piece in a lot of ways that allows me to talk about different things than I otherwise would have. But I'm now going to change gears entirely. So as I do this, I want to make a couple observations and put a couple thoughts out to you. I can provide value by talking a lot about one piece. When I say provide value, I mean, I'm obviously providing value. Well, I feel like I can provide value to everyone if I talk a lot about one piece, because I can get deeper into that piece. And even then, I'm only scratching the surface of this, really, because there's probably all sorts of use of call and response and counterpoint going on that I'm not even capturing here. But I can get a lot of value by talking a lot about one piece. But I can also do a lot of value by making sure I talk about a lot of different people's music, both to make sure there's variety within a week, but also just to make sure that I'm giving everyone feedback. On the other hand, when a lot of people's music, the comments that I give are often going to be, I mean, I like to give positive, constructive comments, not you did this wrong, you did this wrong, right? I mean, if there's something I feel can be improved, I'll point it out. But I'm equally willing and excited to talk about the things that I like about a piece, which I guess it helps the person that I'm talking to because then they can feel, oh, I'm on the right track. But I intend that to be useful to everyone else. If I talk about things that Kika is doing well, then I intend that to be useful as much to everyone else to see, oh, this is something that I could strive for as well. So, in any case, whether I'm talking about your piece or someone else's piece, I hope you get value out of it. But I want to try to vary things up. Sometimes I'll go deep into one piece. Sometimes I'm going to like just talk little bits about lots of pieces. And I also want to talk about music at different stages of development. In other words, if there's a completed piece, I'm happy to talk about that. If there's a piece that's still a work in progress, I'm happy to talk about that. If there's a piece from someone who's really a beginning composer, I want to talk about some of those, as well as pieces from, people who are really experienced. It's all really interesting to me. So what I want to do next is I'm going to, as I said, switch gears by jumping over to so Rod, I had asked you earlier, and I don't remember if I saw an answer from Rod. Not to listen to a lot of jazz. Okay, Rod, I had asked you before and didn't see answer, which I may have just missed. If you had a preference of which piece, but I think I'm going to listen to the first one that you posted. We're going to check out this one under music, under the harmony and chord progressions course. So this was an exercise done. And the exercise, well, actually, I think I'm going to go with this one here because I did a twinkle. Oh, you made it. What happened? I can't access it. It must be private. And so that's the thing. Even though it's added to the group, I thought I was supposed to still be able to see it, but this piece is access denied. So I guess it's private. It has to be unlisted apparently for me to be able to see it. Let's see if I can get your Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. So you got a couple of minutes to maybe fix those. Oh, I can access your Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. So good enough. All right. So the deal with Twinkle Twinkle Little Star is in the course, I did a demonstration in which I wrote out the first 4 measures, or maybe the first 8. I don't remember. And then I asked people to complete it. And so Rod has done that here. So basically the first 4 measures are mine, although apparently he's changed a few notes and noted exactly where they were, and that's great. And then the rest of it, I think, the rest of it I don't recognize, so it must be Rod's own version of it. So let's hear this. Nice. I like it. So, again, I provided the first 4 measures here. I mean, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star had been around forever. I sort of demonstrated my process of how I came up with this arpeggiated pattern, and I hemmed and hawed about this, and I went through. I think I had to do 3 takes of it, just coming up with a version that I actually liked. And so I think what ended up there was the 3rd take, and I even talked a little bit about what I did that I rejected, but. So let me think. Yeah, I don't even remember what note I had here instead of a C, but apparently it wasn't the C. So other than that, so I must have gone back up to the G so that I kept that same ding, 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 ding. And so I probably went up to the G in my original. And then Rod decided to bring it down to a C to connect a little more smoothly to that B. And I think that was a fine choice. And I'm going to download this piece and access it in MuseScore now because, and let's come back to this now. There looked like there was a glitch that happened, and I'm guessing you tried to drag that note down. And did I miss? Yeah, apparently I did. Let me try that again. So it looks like this. Notice how that C is like not centered on the ledger line. And I think you must have double clicked it and dragged it. And if I do that, notice how it lets me kind of move the note around willy-nilly and it's all misaligned and all. So I don't recommend dragging notes in MuseScore as a way of doing things. I double clicked it. That was the mistake I made. If instead of double clicking it, I single click it, now it moves in nice discrete chunks. But it's wrong. This looks like a D, but it's actually a C, and that's because I accidentally double-clicked it and dragged it before. So if I press Control-R, that resets it. So that's a little MuseScore-ism. Be careful you don't double-click your notes and drag them. So there's that, and then, so I say don't drag to change pitch like it was originally a G. Instead, I use the arrow keys, and that moves it a half step at a time, or Shift, Alt, arrow will move diatonically. So anyhow, originally I had this, which is this typical Alberti bass pattern. And then it's kind of a leap down to this G. Now, leaps down are not a problem in Alberti bass. It's going to happen often. Leaps are all over the place in Alberti bass like that. And what's more important is that we pay attention to the voice leading position to position. In other words, this C is connecting to that B. We don't worry about this G connecting to that G unless it's physically hard to play. So I like the C there. Oops, sorry, moved the wrong note. I like the C just fine, but I will point out it broke the pattern a little earlier than I did, and that was one of the things that I actually rejected in my when I first did this, is I felt like I didn't maintain the pattern long enough. And it's tricky when you're composing, in that it took me maybe 10 minutes, maybe not that long, but it probably took me 5 minutes just to write the first measure and a half of music. And by then, I was tired of this Alberti bass pattern. I was tired of being ding, 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 because I'd been working on it for 5 minutes. And so I was ready for a break. I was ready to leave that pattern. But when you actually play it, of course, it doesn't take 5 minutes. It only takes 5 seconds to play. So at that point, our ear isn't necessarily as ready for a break when we're listening to it later as we were when we're writing it. And that's something that's really important to keep in mind when you're writing, that the time scale of what you are thinking about while composing is very different than the time scale of what you're going to be hearing later. So it's very useful to be able to play the piece. And this is one wonderful thing about notation software, is it will happily play that piece up to tempo, even if you've written something too complicated to actually play. Like if I'm writing some big complicated orchestra score, there's no way I can play all that part up to tempo and get all the stuff going on. Like in Kika's piece, there's no way without notation software I could have heard that. I could have done, play it in my brain and tried to imagine the sound of it, and that's what composers had to do back in the day. But notation software will allow us to hear the playback, and then we can start asking ourselves these questions like, did I make a choice based on something that I thought about how long I had spent on this versus something else? Now in this case, I don't know that that's the only reason. I think C is also a valid voice leading choice. That's a nice line. So it's nice, smooth voice leading. And then I like that he then echoed it here because I think my version probably went back up to a G there, because it was probably still thinking about this Alberti bass-ish alternating thing. Yeah, I definitely did that. And so if you're going to make that choice in one place, have a descending line there. I love the way that it's echoed over here. Yeah, and so he also changed the end. Now, the ending, I had a quarter note, right? I think I just had a G quarter note here. And that's part of why I put this G quarter note here, was to give it a sense of unity from this phrase to that phrase. I would say, given that you've now changed that rhythm here, I might want to hear this also. So I'm going to put this as a little scalar line here and see how I like this now. I want to see if I like it. So to me, I don't know if that's necessarily an improvement, but it's definitely something I would have considered. The reason I had a quarter note here was because I also had a quarter note there. Well, I knew I wanted the quarter note here because I wanted a sense of finality to that first phrase, and the quarter note was going to give me that. And then for balance sake, I did it here. So if you're going to get rid of that finality here, I kind of feel like it doesn't necessarily need to be here. And I think I talked about that finality and balance in my demonstration, either that or I only did in one of the drafts that I threw away. But so you got rid of that finality here, but then you created a new version of it with the rest in the next measure, which it also looks like got offset here. So I'm going to hit Control R to reset the position of that. So let me hear this again. So I'm going to look at just that phrase. So that rest beginning the phrase to me is a really interesting device. It gives it another interesting rhythmic thing going on. It's a new. It's almost like in Kika's piece when she changed from one ostinato pattern to a different ostinato pattern. That's kind of what's happening here, except then it doesn't happen again. It kind of makes me want to try it. Like what would happen if I deleted the first note from a couple other passages in here. It kind of makes me want to hear that. It's different. I don't know that, I think your use of that just to demarcate the beginning of the section is good. I don't necessarily need that to then become a repeating pattern, but it's something to think about. It is definitely something to think about. And the other thing that made me think that is there is something a little bit awkward about the repeated note here. It's not impossible to play on the piano. It's just you just lift your thumb up and play it again. But it's going to change the articulation slightly in that these other notes I can play super legato because I can be playing, like I play that B with my pinky, I play that D with my third finger, and I can actually overlap them slightly. In other words, that D can be coming down while the B is still. The D can be coming down while the B is still down, and then I release the B only a little bit later. That's how you play legato, so that the notes actually overlap. But to have a repeated note, I actually have to lift the thumb and bring it back down. So it's going to break any sense of legato that happens there. It's a subtle effect on piano because I can do my best to make that smooth. On wind instruments, though, be aware that this is even a more important consideration. If you are ever going to score this out for wind instruments, wind instruments can go do and B, D, G. That's a clarinet fingering. B, well, it's a clarinet fingering in a different octave, but whatever. It's a woodwind fingering. B, and then, so I'm blowing my airstream while lifting my fingers. That's called slurring. But then once I reach that top G, if I want to repeat the G, I have to break my airstream and start it again with my tongue. So I have to actually use my tongue to go to repeat that G. So repeated notes within eighth note figures like this are a little bit problematic and something to think about. So that was something else that made me want to play with that rest there. So I might leave that one in place for now and just see what it sounds like. So I want to hear it coming out of here. Oh, a tied, yeah. So tying it over could be just as useful, right? So let me yeah. Oh, I like that better than the rest. Yeah. It gives me, yeah, it adds something now. It creates this almost a sense of a suspension, even though it's not, but it creates a real sense of interest. Oh yeah, nice. Good idea. Good idea. Yeah, and then this measure you could choose to do the same thing, or you just go back into the eighth notes, and that's fine. So now here he's using that technique of kind of repeating, of giving continuity, giving some similarity between, the dotted quarter note here gives a nice finality to this phrase. The dotted quarter note here, this isn't any sense that we don't want this to feel final, but it predicts the next measure. And so that's a valid choice. To me, I might not have made that choice personally. I like that we have this echo of the rhythm from here to here, but because it's like a new rhythm that didn't happen before, it feels like I would rather have heard that echo here. In other words, at the end of the second measure, not so much in the third measure, because now it feels like, oh, we've introduced a new element, but that's not a bad thing. But let me just, for grins, change that to C, D. No, I'm going to go C, E, G. There we go. Yeah, I don't know if you like it better, whatever. I'm tossing out ideas because these are the things that I would have tried. I'm always interested in talking about the things that I would have tried, and then I make my choice. And I'm going to come back to that question about try and make choice. Actually, no, I'm going to talk about that briefly. One of the reasons I like to try things is not to make a final call on it, but to say, oh yeah, I like these both. Let me keep them. Because ultimately, remember, Mozart wrote a whole series of variations on this. And a lot of my demonstrations, I only do one chorus, one verse of the piece. When I played you that version of We Gather Together, I wrote 3 verses worth of it, and they were each a little different. So it was nice because I got to make some choices, some harmonic choices differently from one verse to the next verse. Some of them were the same, but some choices I got to make differently. So this idea that you might try 4 things out and say, one of them I definitely didn't like. One of them I'm not so sure about, but 2 of them I liked a lot. Well, now you've got some information to use for the second verse, or the recapitulation if it's a sonata form or whatever, or the development section. You have a way to go different places. So I like to have multiple options, and to keep them. All right, now let's hear this. This is the same. All right, now the final phrase here is nice. He's got this leapy thing happening, and I think that was one of the ones that I did and then sort of rejected. But I think I'm going to like it better at the end of the piece here. Oh, I like that a lot. So I think this is related to what I had in one of my rejected versions. It's probably a little bit different. But yeah, this doom king king king. Actually, it's funny because that type of figure, it's walking sixths, basically, is what we refer to it as. It's a sixth here, and then a sixth from the E to the C, and then a sixth from the F sharp to the D. In other words, it's going from the third of the chord to the root, third to root. Leaps up to the root like that. Or it could be a leap between the fifth and the third. But these sort of walking parallel sixths that are broken up like that, it's a really nice device, as are parallel thirds. This is walking thirds. Boom, 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 boom. It's like 2/3, E to G, and then F sharp to A, 2/3 moving in parallel, except they're broken up, so that instead of hearing the C and G together, we hear them one at a time. This is now the same thing in sixths. Walking thirds are great. Walking sixths are great. They've been around for hundreds of years. The thing you don't want to do, and walking octaves can actually be nice in a modern sense. They might not have done that so much in the Renaissance or early Baroque, but walking octaves are okay. They have their own sense. Walking thirds are great. Walking sixths are great. Walking fifths are the ones that you maybe don't do so much, or walking fourths. And then that starts to get into parallel fifths, to use the current terminology for a thing that was a controversial topic 400 years ago. So yeah, I love these parallel these walking sixths here, and I love especially the fact that here the C gets doubled and we didn't get to hear the G, and that's fine. It's fine to double the root and omit the fifth. But here it's really nice that we got to hear the root because the melody didn't give us the root. So I liked how that worked. Yeah, and that's just a nice arpeggio, and then walking thirds, and then our little final piece on the end of it. So so really nice. So where else am I seeing other so once we've introduced the idea of syncopations, there's going to be plenty of opportunities for it. So he's saying that the D in bar 6 would be nice to be tied. So this, I don't know which D. I see 3 different Ds in bar 6 here. This one here, I'm going to try that one. I'll make it a quarter note and tie it just to see. Because that way it's tying across the chord. So that, I don't know if that's what you meant. That would have worked. Although I think I'd be more inclined to maybe still have it be syncopated like this one was. It was on the and of 2 and put it again on the and of 2. And here also, if I wanted to maybe, whoops, I'll just tie it over just to see. Now once I have that syncopation going, I definitely would have wanted to have heard that line continue in eighth notes. So this to me has a nice cohesion also. I like that tie idea. Yeah, and same thing here. I would have to change this to go. Got to change that line too. So now we have something different, right? This isn't what Rod wrote, but this might have made an effective second verse if we were going to do another verse of this. So, yeah, or just another choice to have going there. So, yeah, these are the kind of details now that we talk about when we're talking about this kind of music, kind of different kind of details than we talked about with Kika's piece, except when I talk about texture and continuity and things like that, it's really the same sort of thing. So in any case, I've been talking for a long time, and I know I only got to cover 2 pieces, but I got to talk about them, and I'm happy about that. So I'm going to take next week off, as I mentioned. I wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. And if it's not a holiday that's normally part of your culture, maybe make it an honorary part this year. It feels like a good year to be reassessing what we do have to be thankful for. Because as difficult of a year as it's been for many of us, there's still plenty to be thankful for most of us as well. So I wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. That gives you 2 weeks then to get me music before next week. And let's try to get some holiday themed music. It'll be December by then. So we'll get to, maybe have some actual Christmas themed music or just winter themed music in general. The Christmas carols that we have, some of them are, Jingle Bells there's nothing specifically Christmas about it. It's just a winter carol, right? And others are more obviously, about Jesus Christ's birth. Other parts are specifically about Santa Claus, whatever. Pick your own aspect of that music to celebrate. So, yeah, I look forward to looking at some holiday-themed music next month. Not necessarily exclusively so, but let's do what we can. And I will see everyone in a couple weeks. Thanks a lot, everyone.